What's going on, Colts Nation? I appreciate you joining me for another video where today we're going to continue and kind of finish this conversation about Jonathan Taylor. And yesterday we looked at some of the tape from last year, talked about what we saw from beginning of season to end of season, and is Jonathan Taylor going to be the guy that he was before the injuries? And the consensus for me is that yes, Jonathan Taylor will be that guy. And if you want more in-depth analysis on that point, then after this video, go ahead, check that video out. Make sure to like both of these videos. Make sure you subscribe with notifications on. We're going to keep talking about more players as the days roll on, as we wait for training camp to come around. But again, as we sit here today, I want to talk about Jonathan Taylor. I want to project what he's going to do in the upcoming season. And first, want to look back at what he was able to do last year compared to some of these teams that he's going to be playing this year. When you look at the Texans, week one, they also play them October 27th. So 2 games in the first half of the schedule against the Texans. Jonathan Taylor last year, even though the Colts lost that last game of the season 23-19, Jonathan Taylor had 30 carries, 188 yards, and a touchdown. Now, do I think the Texans are going to be better this year than they were last year? Yeah, without a doubt. I do think the Texans have an opportunity to be better. I think D'Amico Ryans is a good coach. So that game, it's going to be tough. Do I think Jonathan Taylor is going to go off for nearly 200 yards? Probably not. I think that one's going to be a little more of a shootout in both of those games. Probably more passing in those games. Jaguars game, we really didn't get to see much of Jonathan Taylor, and we didn't see him at all, of course, in the week one matchup. But in week six, it was only Jonathan Taylor's second game back. He ends up with 8 carries for 19 yards. So as we come into this season and we look around, like there's some of those games where I think there's going to be a lot of passing, right? Like I said, the 2 games against the Texans, I think could be a good amount of passing. The game against the Packers in week two could be a decent amount of passing. So those first couple of weeks, you could look at Jonathan Taylor's stats and be like, "Oh man, he's not doing a whole lot," but or at least compared to what his contract warrants and the star that he was for us in 2022, that everybody expects him to be at all times. Might not start the season like that because we have to pass a little more because those games could be shootouts. But as we go through the season, their matchups, you have the Bears, the Steelers, the Titans, the Vikings, like that first half of the schedule, it's about half and a half, right? The Jaguars game could be a shootout, especially going into Jacksonville. And we know what happens when the Colts go into Jacksonville. So who knows what's going to happen there? We're probably going to have to pass a lot. But again, the first half of the schedule is about half and half. Games that I think we're going to have to pass more. Then you have some games where I think we're going to have the opportunity to be able to run more. Now, I think with this scheme and having Anthony Richardson and Jonathan Taylor, we're going to be probably pretty balanced anyways. But game flow is such a big deal when it comes to running back and running back production on the ground. Like, yeah, they can get production through the air. And in terms of fantasy football, it can be valuable. They can be valuable to teams like a Christian McCaffrey is valuable through the air as well as on the ground. But when it comes down to it, I think Jonathan Taylor is going to have plenty of opportunity through this season to be able to have massive impacts on some of these games. And again, when you look back at last season and what he did, right, those first 2 games where he came back against the Titans and Jaguars, he barely touched the ball, right? 14 total carries, had a total of 37 yards and no touchdowns on the ground. So not doing much of anything there. He had, 5 catches for 46 yards against the Jaguars when they got blown out. But it's really after that where his production kicked up those last 8 games while he was splitting carries with Zach Moss, right? There are games in here, he has 12 carries in the New Orleans game and he has 15 carries in the Tampa game. Only a couple games during the season where he actually got to 20 carries, right? New England, he had 23 carries. Las Vegas, he had 21 carries. In the last game of the season, Houston, he had 30 carries. So he was splitting duty with Zach Moss, still had 700 yards in those 8 games. So come back, right, averaged 4.4 yards per carry. And when you talk about him taking the lion's share and having Anthony Richardson by his side, his numbers should be really good this season. right? And again, you look through the schedule, there are those games where you're passing, but as we get past the Vikings game, you get more games, a lot more games, in my opinion, on the back half where Jonathan Taylor could have a big impact in these games. And the running game could be very prevalent, especially at the end of the season when you're going to places that are outdoors and the weather could be a factor. You have the Buffalo Bills coming to Indy in November. I think the running game could be big for the Colts there. Then you go November 17th into New York. Again, weather could be playing a factor at that point. We'll have to see what's happening in November, but that's a game where I think we could run the ball a lot against the Lions. I think both teams could run the ball a lot. Patriots, both teams could run the ball a lot. Broncos, both teams could run the ball a lot. The Titans, Giants games, I think there's a good chance that we have the opportunity to be up in those games and to be running the ball a lot. So there's a lot of opportunity here for Jonathan Taylor and Anthony Richardson to be able to get yards. And we already talked about Anthony Richardson and what his projections are. If you didn't see those videos, also go make sure to watch those videos, give a like, and again, make sure you're subscribed. But for Jonathan Taylor, what I see for him with the schedule that we have, the defenses that we're going to be playing, we have some really tough defenses on the schedule, but Jonathan Taylor is that dude. And the offensive line looked really good last year with the continuity of the players and the coaching staff and having really good coaches. And I trust, Tony Soprano Jr. and this coaching staff with the offensive line. I think they did great last year. And I think they're going to be even better this year with that continuity. And I think in turn, Jonathan Taylor has a revival season where he's not going to end up, with almost 2,000 rushing yards like he did a few years ago, but he's going to have 1,300 plus rushing yards this season. He's going to end up with 12 rushing touchdowns. Now, of course, some of the rushing yards, some of the touchdowns getting taken away because of Anthony Richardson. Anthony Richardson kind of factors into these numbers, of course. So, again, 1,300 or more rushing yards for Jonathan Taylor, 12 rushing touchdowns. Okay, a big year for Jonathan Taylor. One of the best, most dynamic players in the NFL, shows people and reminds people this year why he's one of those guys. And when you want to talk about total yards, you start adding in some receiving yards here. I think he's dynamic enough to have 400 or more receiving yards. I think he can be a safety valve for Anthony Richardson. Their connection could be good enough where if Anthony Richardson's in trouble and he needs somebody, boom, Jonathan Taylor is going to be available now. Also, Michael Pittman is also very good at staying available. Josh Downs, good at staying available. Again, we're going to be watching film on these guys, and we'll talk about how good they are for their quarterbacks and the kind of hustle that they have staying open. So make sure you subscribe with notifications on so you get notified when those videos come out this week. But for Jonathan Taylor, 400 plus receiving yards, 3 receiving touchdowns. So overall for Jonathan Taylor, in my opinion, in the 2024 season, I have Jonathan Taylor ending up with more than 1,700, right? 1,700 plus total yards in the 2024 season, 15 total touchdowns in this season. And that's not unfathomable, right? Again, a couple years ago in 2022, he had 1,800 yards, over 1,800 rushing yards. That's not even total yards. He had over 1,800 rushing yards. And I believe he had 23 total touchdowns that season. So Jonathan Taylor coming back this year could be wildly dynamic for us. I expect him to be the superstar that we know him to be, just like I expect Josh Downs to take that next step. A.D. Mitchell to be really good. I expect Pittman to be the star that we know he is. As long as AR stays healthy, man, this offense is going to be incredibly dangerous, and we're going to continue to look into these guys. I've already mentioned it a couple times. So again, Pittman's next. Josh Downs later in this week. We're going to continue talking about this and looking back on last season, looking at some of what our favorite players did last year, while also looking ahead to this upcoming season to project what are these guys going to do, what should we expect. And of course, I want your guys' opinion, so make sure to comment down below. Let me know what you're thinking about all of this in the comment section. And again, subscribe, have those notifications on. Content's going to continue to roll on throughout this off season. Of course, I appreciate you stopping by for another video. And as always, take care of yourself, take care of each other, and go Colts.